What's up, everyone? Derek here. A little bit sad I had to get this stupid thing going already. It's a chilly day here in Iowa. Today I'm going to be doing my version of the 5,000 mile service on my 2012 Ford Raptor. I'm going to be doing an oil change, rotate the tires, and inspecting a bunch of stuff. And I'm going to go through and show you exactly what I do. The first thing we do is get the oil drained. Luckily with this truck, you don't have to jack it up to get underneath of it. It's a little tight for me, but I'm a bigger guy. Basically what we're gonna do is loosen up this bolt here. It's a 16 millimeter. Just kind of put pressure on it as you back it out. And then when it's free, pull it and try to get your hand out of the way. Make sure you have your drain pan ready. It does hold 7 quarts, so I've got a couple drain pans. They're all only 7 quarts. I need to get a couple bigger ones. I have a feeling the oil is going to hit that sway bar, but oh well. I did drive around for a while just to warm everything up. It helps get all the old oil out a little bit easier when it's more liquid. So like I said, my old pans are only 7 quarts, not so much this holds, so let's swap pan out here so I can let it drain. And we'll just let that sit for a while we work on our other stuff. So next thing we got to do is get the oil filter out. Ford was nice enough to put this access plate in the skid plate so we can get it out a little easier. It's a T40. If you don't know what a T looks like, just a Torx bit, kind of like a 6-pointed star pattern. My little impact driver is not quite strong enough to break these loose, so I'll break them loose by hand and pull them out the rest of the way with my impact. The last bolt, just make sure you grab your skid plate, otherwise it'll fall and make a big noise. Alright, so here's your oil filter. This one's white, sometimes they're black, sometimes they're blue, gray. They can be a bunch of different colors, but it's all the same process regardless. You're just gonna turn it left. This one I'm able to just get loose with my hand. Some of them you need to use a special wrench because they just crank them down when they change the oil. Like I said, I was able to turn this one by hand. Get your drain pan ready underneath of it. And kind of same thing with your drain pan bolt. I like to keep pressure up on it just so it doesn't pop off and make a great big mess. There you can see some of the oil draining out of it already. So I'll just kind of let it sit and drain for a little bit before I try to pull it off any further. Another nice thing Ford did was added that little drain ramp, I guess you could call it. Keeps all the oil off of your axle or your frame and all the other stuff up there. So that's pretty nice. This is the first oil change I've done on this, so just kind of figuring stuff out along with you guys. So it's done dripping. Let's spin this off the rest of the way. See there, you know it's all the way off the threads. So make sure you tilt it because oil will come out. And then pour it into your pan. This right here is your sealing O-ring. You want to make sure that that's on your filter. The whole piece of it has to be on your filter, because if anything fell off or if that's still stuck up there, when you put your new filter on, you won't get it tight enough, and all of your brand new spendy oil will be on the floor. So again, you just kind of check up here. I like to feel around, make sure that that O-ring got off of there completely. Then I'll actually wipe that down before I put a new filter in. So another thing I like to do when I'm changing my oil is I'll pull the oil fill cap off here. And that just kind of lets the drain pan breathe a little bit better, hopefully getting some more stuff out. Next thing we're going to do is I'm going to rotate the tires. And I do this at every oil change so I can get a better look at my brakes and suspension components. The first thing you're going to do is put a board under your front tires. To jack it up, just put your jack, I put it underneath my diff, and then jack stands will go right underneath these leaf spring mounts. That's probably the strongest part on the axle. So we're going to lift it up just high enough to get the tires off, get the jack stands locked in, and then we'll set it down nice and slow on top of them. For the fronts, I'm going to put my jack right underneath that transmission subframe brace, and jack stand right by this arrow that you see in the frame. You have to lift it up high enough to get the tire off the ground, which on this truck I assume is going to take a little bit. So you see, oh, no. So there's my tires off the ground. I can spin it around a little bit. So lift this up. Go a little higher to hit the next block. And then slowly lower it down. Make sure the tire's still off the ground. And then I'll count 1, 2, 3, 4, these notches to make sure that I have it at the same height on the other side. I'll show you guys how to take the wheels off. I'm only going to show you on one. It's the same for all four. On this truck, the lug nut here is a 21 millimeter. I've got an electric impact made by Milwaukee. You can use an air impact. You can use a socket with a ratchet, the lug bar that comes in the car. So whatever you've got to take them off. If you're gonna use anything besides an impact, make sure you break them loose before you lift the truck up. It'll just be a lot easier. Otherwise, you have to get someone in there to hold the brake down for you. And I don't have anybody else, so buzz this off quick. Here's a little trick. If your wheel still won't come off, after you get all the lug nuts off, see it's on there pretty tight yet. Usually kind of turn around and kick it like this with my foot. Keep your hand up here, otherwise it'll fly off on you. Just kick it a couple times and there you go. I'm going to show you guys what I look for when I do inspections. Like I said, part of me rotating the tires every oil changes so I can get a better look at stuff. I bought this with really low miles, so I wanted to keep up on everything so it'll last a long time. The first thing I do is to check your rotors here. Make sure there's no big lips on either side, top or bottom. That's good. The brakes, you want to make sure that there's enough material here on your pads. This right here, it's hard to see. There's the backing plate and then the material. You can kind of see here. Here's your caliper. This right here is your backing plate, and then this is the actual brake material. You want to make sure there's enough on both sides, and this one looks really good. Next thing I'll do is come over to the sway bar end links here. Just kind of grab them, shake them. There's no play in it, so those are good. If there's a bunch of grease coming out of here, I'd think about changing them here sooner than later. Your axle shaft on the front is a CV or a half shaft. You want to make sure there's no rips in the boot. Make sure there's no rips in these boots here on both ends, and you'll know there's a rip if you got a bunch of grease that's kind of flung all over the place. If you see that, it's time to change them. That means you're running out of oil in there, or grease in there, I suppose, and the actual joint itself will go bad pretty quickly. We'll come up to this upper ball joint here. I just kind of feel it. No rips, no grease hanging out. Since this is my first time doing a service on this truck, I'm looking for grease zerks as well. Sometimes you'll have them up here. If there is a grease zerk, then give it a few pumps of grease. This one doesn't have one, so I'm not going to worry about it. Come down to our bottom ball joint here. Same thing with that. Check it for rips, grease coming out. That looks really good. Tie rod end is right here. You see it goes up to the steering rack. Same thing. There's a lot of times there'll be a grease zerk up here. If they're greasable, this one's not. So no holes or anything in that one. I'll check the inner tie rod to see if I have oil coming out. And that looks good. If you do have oil seeping out of the end of that boot, that means it's time for a new rack and pinion, because the inner seals are bad. We'll move on to the shock. Bought this truck. The shocks didn't look great. They do have some corrosion on them. And then I'm checking for broken bushings on the bottom. Up on the top, inside of here, you'll see sometimes it'll start falling out when it's bad. Make sure the spring's not broken anywhere. No visible cracks. And the big thing I'm looking for is leaky shocks, which this one is leaking. If I can get a good picture. So you see all that oil. See all that oil right there? That's from the seals are bad in the shocks, which I had a feeling they were when I bought it. I do plan on rebuilding all the shocks myself here. Definitely sooner than later, since at least one of them is leaking. The other thing you want to check is on your upper control arms here. There's bushings on the inside. Make sure those are all good. Kind of the same thing. You'll see them kind of falling apart if it's bad. Upper or lower control arm bushings as well. You got one there and then one over here, and that all looks good. That's it for the front. I do that on both sides, obviously. Now we'll move on to the back. A lot of this is the same, there's just not as many components. So again, check the brakes, rotors, make sure there's no big lip. Check the pads. Pads actually look really good. You see there, that big metal part in the middle is the rotor, and then you have your braking material on either side, and then the backing plate. That looks good. The other thing I forgot to mention on the front is check for leaks on your brake calipers, whether on the line up here, right there, or coming out of the caliper itself. Those piston seals. The piston seals do go bad, and they just dry rot, kind of fall apart, and then you got leaks, and it's going to affect your braking quite a bit. On here, on the back, is a leaf spring. So gonna check that. Look at, there's little bushings here. Make sure there's no cracks. It's not severely rusted, anything like that. You're gonna check your bump stop. Make sure that's still there and in good condition, right there. And then your shocks on the back. Said same thing. I'm looking for, yeah, this one's really corroded. That's going to take some work to get that off of there. And check for leaks. These ones are mounted kind of an upside down style. So if you have a leak, it'll actually be all over your shaft. I think my rears look pretty good here, or this side anyways. So I'm going to do the other side, and then we'll move on to the next thing. Another thing I forgot to mention on the other side, I guess, is the shackles on the back. Make sure the bushings are okay in those. And then the front, there's just a bushing for your leaf spring up in there. Make sure that's good. And actually this side, my rear shock is leaking. So you can kind of see the oil puddled up there on the bottom. Ford and Fox recommend rebuilding the shocks every 50,000 miles. This has 60 on it, so it was due anyways. They actually have different change or rebuild intervals depending on how you use the truck, whether it's all off-road, some off-road, stuff like that. So like I said, I'll be doing those sooner than later and take you guys along for the ride on that as well. Front suspension on the other side looks good. The other shock is leaking though, so again, I'm gonna end up replacing those here sooner than later. There you can see that leak a lot better. Next thing I do is check my differentials. There's no leak coming out of them. That one looks good. They can leak on top, so just kind of look over the whole thing. On your drive shafts, inside here are some U-joints. They have to move around to allow for different angles and stuff like that. So make sure those are all good. Move the drive shaft back and forth. Make sure there's not a bunch of play inside of here. That back and forth is completely normal there. I'll look for grease zerks on this as well. These are non-greasable, so I don't think anything has a grease zerk on this truck. While I'm underneath, I'll just kind of look for rust, stuff that's obviously broken, things like that. Move to the front of the drive shaft. And same thing. Checking the U-joint out. Making sure there's not a lot of play. That's all good. No grease zerk on that one either. So this is actually a slip joint that goes in and out. If you had oil coming out of here, then that seal would need to get replaced. So double check that. That looks good. Transfer case. Again, check for leaks. Got your drain and fill plugs. Those will seep sometimes. Gaskets in between the halves. Stuff like that. Transmission mount bushing. That looks good. Coming forward. Here's our other axle that goes, or drive shaft, sorry, goes to the front axle. This one does not use a U-joint. It's kind of like a ball and socket type. Same with the front. These shouldn't have play in them either. A little bit back and forth, but that's okay. Exhaust, check for leaks, holes, stuff like that. And that's pretty much it for the inspection stuff. One thing I did miss on the front is the sway bar here. It has bushings that mounted up to the frame. Just double check that and make sure they're okay. Those are good. It's really the only stuff that I need to do sooner than later is rebuild all the shocks. All right, before I put the wheels back on, I'm going to actually finish up putting my oil filter and the drain plug back in. Like I mentioned before, just take a rag and wipe this off. Try to get all the extra oil off of there, out of this little drain slide. Just helps keep stuff clean. On your new filter, kind of the same as the old one, make sure that O-ring is there actually when you're at the store before you buy it. Because if that's missing, then you'll lose all of your oil. I usually take a little bit of brand new oil and put it around that O-ring. That just keeps it from binding up when I put it on. Installs reverse. Just stick it up there and twist it on. Don't cross thread it. It should spin on really easy, as you can see. Usually spin it till it seats like that, and then give her a couple good cranks by hand. And that's as tight as you need to make it, guys. There's a lot of people that go ham on these, put a wrench on them to tighten them, and that's completely unnecessary. Just get them good and hand tight. It'll be easier to take off and it's not going to leak on you. Next thing we'll do is put the drain pan bolt back in. Same thing with this. Wipe it down. I like to keep stuff clean. Makes working on things easier later on. Drain pan plug. Wipe that off. There is a seal on here, just a little one. I would recommend getting a couple of those to have in a hand just in case it goes bad on you. But again, just up there. And then tighten it with your ratchet socket. All to do up here is put the access cover to the skid plate on. These little clips are actually your nuts, so make sure that they're all lined up with the holes, otherwise you'll have trouble putting it on. Grab your cover. Just like everything else, just righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, and install is reverse of removal. Next part of the inspection is you want to check your tires. Check all 4 of them. You want to make sure it's wearing evenly across the tread of the tire. Make sure there's no cupping on the sides. That's your wear bar. When your lugs are the same height as that bar, then it's time to replace your tires. Actually, it's past time to replace them. So that's kind of what you want to look at, is you want to see how much distance you have between the top of your lug and the top of that bar. These still have quite a bit of life left in them. So when you rotate tires, there's different ways to do them. Some people will do X patterns front to back, all kinds of stuff. What I've always done on non-directional tires is the rear tire goes to the front, and then the front one, obviously it comes to the back, but on the other side. So I'm on the left side of the truck. My left rear tire will go to my left front, and my right front tire will actually come back here. I think that just helps with wear patterns and making sure everything wears evenly. And I'm going to show you on this last wheel how to put it up there. These are big, heavy tires, so it's a little tricky. But basically, I just pick it up by the top, get it as close to the caliper or the rotor as you can, lean it in, and then kind of use your noodle a little bit to push on it and lift up. And obviously you want to line up the holes in your wheels to the lug nut, or the lug. Get one of them lined up, then you can kind of turn it a little bit so you can put it on the rest of the way. And then you spin all your nuts on and torque them down. Alright guys, we're almost done with everything. A couple last things we have to do to the wheels is torque them down and check our tire pressures all the way around. If you open up your driver door, there's this little sticker in here with the wheel and tire on it. It tells you what you should put your tire pressures at, if it'll focus. But front and rear should be at 44 psi. We'll go through that. Here's the case you've never done it. But here, you just take your valve stem cap off. I've got a fancy air tire chuck. It's got a gauge built into it. But even just the cheap little dollar ones, I wouldn't recommend them. They're not usually right, but get yourself a decent tire pressure gauge and keep track of them. You'll save your tires quite a bit if you do. But you just kind of push it on the end there and then read what it says. I'm at about 40, so I'm gonna have to put some air in probably all 4 of them. Your tire pressures change with the seasons, gets warmer, colder, things like that. So when you are tightening your lug nuts and when you torque them, you want to do it in a crisscross pattern. So you start at the top here and go straight across, and then go up to this one, over to this one, and then this one's last. Now I'll usually go through it twice. The torque on this truck is 150 foot-pounds, so it's pretty much the only thing that I always torque down. I've had wheels fall off of a vehicle before because a buddy was working on it and didn't do it right. So it's an easy step. You can get a good torque wrench for really not that much money. So if you're going to work on stuff, I would definitely recommend getting one. Alright guys, almost done with everything. Kind of the last stuff I do after I got wheels on the ground, everything torqued down. Gonna fill it up with oil, check all my fluids, make sure they're good, top them off if I need to. Just a quick, what I use for oil on this truck is going to be the Mobil 1 Extended Performance 520 and Mobil 1 Extended Performance filter with that number. I tend to overthink things and do a bunch of research, and most of the people on the internet said that this was the best oil and filter to use for the 6.2, so that's what I'm going to use. Thanks for coming along with me while I do my first maintenance on this. Look forward to doing some other stuff with you.